Now that we have our terrain, it's time to begin sculpting our terrain, maybe to make it look like hills or valleys or lakes or whatever. What we need to do before we start that is we need to add some light to our project. As we're looking here in our camera preview, we can see everything is kind of this muddy, dark gray, and we're not going to be able to see any detail. So what I want to do is I'm going to come up here to Game Object, Create Other, and Directional Light. That's going to simulate kind of like the sun in our world here. We don't need to necessarily focus on how it works or anything. We'll talk about lights at a later time. Now that we have some light on our project, we're going to be able to see some detail. Before we sculpt the terrain with terrain tools, we're going to talk about something called a height map. A height map is a black and white image that is going to be able to be exported from, say, like Photoshop or GIMP or some other picture editing software, and it's going to be able to sculpt terrain based on its color properties. In a height map, black is going to correlate with completely flat, and white is going to correlate with the maximum height. In this terrain, we set our maximum height as 600, and we're going to see that that's actually going to be maybe a little too tall for us. So let's look at what this height map is. If you go to the files that you downloaded, here, you're going to see these images here. The first is going to be this height map 1.jpg, and you can see that it is a black and white image. Nothing is completely white, nothing is completely black, so it's going to be this nice mix of low and high points. Now, we don't actually use this JPG file. We're going to use this thing called the raw file, and we are going to utilize that to sculpt our terrain. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy this, and I'm going to come over here to my assets folder, and I am going to create a new folder, and I'm going to call it height maps. And I'm going to put this inside there. Now, this height map happens to be 256 by 256. So if I come back into Unity and I come to my terrain and I go set resolution, I'm going to choose for my height map resolution 256. And I'll set my resolution there. And then I'll come back to terrain and I'm going to select import height map raw. Into my assets folder, height maps. Here's our raw. I'll hit open. Now we see some information that's built into this particular file. We can also see our terrain size here. Now, when I hit import, you're going to watch this thing's going to go pretty crazy. I'm going to hit import. Now, not only does the terrain appear to disappear, it's still there. If I focus on it, we can see here that it is just very, very nuts. And the reason for that is because our height is so incredibly high that the white and the dark elements vary in sizes. So what I can do is I can come up to my terrain and I can set my resolution. Let's pick something a little bit smaller. Let's say something like 20. And I set my resolution, and now we can see how it's quite a bit more manageable. It'll focus in a bit more when we get closer, but we have our terrain now that's more reasonable for what we want. If I come back to my main camera here, we can see the terrain has actually been lifted up. And the reason for that is because since 0 is all the way down and this image didn't have any perfect black, nothing is all that low. So we would actually have to come to our camera. We'd have to lift it up a little bit. I'm not going to bother adjusting from my cameras yet because I want to use a different image to kind of give you more of an idea when we're talking about light and the dark, the black and the white colors, adjusting the height. So I'm going to come back to my images folder here. And there's another image we have here, and it just says Unity Rocks. So we have a black background, a dark gray color here, and a lighter gray color here. And we're going to be able to see how that changes the height of our image. And here's our Unity Rocks raw. I'm just going to go ahead and copy that, come back to my height maps folder and paste it, just like that. And I'm going to come back to terrain, import height map, and I'm going to come to assets, height maps, and I'm going to choose Unity Rocks. Now, before I do that, actually, I just want to verify that Unity Rocks is 1024 by 1024. Before I use this, I'm going to come to my terrain, set my resolution, the height map resolution to 1024. If we don't set our height map resolution appropriately, it's not going to look right. Now I'm going to import my height map, assets, height maps, choose Unity Rocks, and hit open. This information should be correct here. I'll hit import, and we can see here the Unity Rocks is now part of our terrain. It is backwards. That's just how the terrain works with the height mapping. We could have written the text in the height map backwards and it would have appeared in the correct way here, but you can get the idea of how the darkness or the lightness of the gray scale image will affect the height of the terrain. So if you want to make your own height map, there's a couple things you need to know about how Unity does it. First, your image must be grayscale. Any color information at the best case won't work. At the worst case will cause it to malfunction and maybe be glitchy. So it has to be a grayscale image. Second, it has to be the raw data format. I know Photoshop and GIMP can produce raw data format. If you have some photo editor or some image editor that you like, make sure they can output in the raw image format. Finally, the resolution of the image must match the resolution in the terrain settings. And as we saw, if I come to my terrain settings and my set resolution, only takes one dimension, 1024, so it doesn't take a width and a height. We can see that our height map should probably be perfectly square. So 64, 128, 512, 1024, so on and so forth. It makes it much more efficient, and it makes it easier to load. It makes our terrain look pretty good.